A letter was sent from Ms. Elena, who is 49 years old. Her current job is running a food stall in a junior high school cafeteria. She learned about our channel through her students. During lunch breaks, students stay back at the canteen to eat, and those who have extra classes in the afternoon often turn on the channel to listen. Right at episode 476 about the story of usurping the disabled youngest sibling's land, the canteen was quiet because most students go home for lunch, leaving only a few behind. After listening, Ms. Elena suddenly wanted to burst into tears because she remembered her own younger brother, who had been developmentally delayed since childhood. So she asked her students to help her write down this letter to send to us. I am the eldest sister in the family. Below me is the third brother named Thomas and the youngest brother named Timothy. We called him Tiny because when he was born, he was very small, and he was even born unexpectedly in the middle of a rice field. My mother had him quite late, so my youngest brother and I were 10 years apart. Before he was even a month old, my mother had to go back to work, leaving little Timothy at home for me to take care of. Those years were very difficult. Our family was poor. When my father married my mother, both families didn't approve. So we received no help from the paternal or maternal grandparents. But my mother was very hardworking. She never sat still for a moment, moving from one job to another to earn money. She worked nonstop. Even so, she still couldn't please my paternal grandmother. Because my mother's side was poor and my maternal grandfather had 2 wives, the paternal side would say things like, when marrying a man, look at his lineage. When marrying a woman, look at her breed. Fearing that my mother would also have unfaithful blood, like her father. My mother was deeply hurt hearing that, but because she loved my father, she gritted her teeth and endured. When little Timothy was born, he was playful and cute, just like any normal baby. However, by the time he was 5 years old, he still didn't know how to walk or talk. My paternal grandmother saw her grandson like that. But instead of showing love, she used it to mock my mother. She said we were already poor, but still greedy for more children. And because we didn't know how to raise them, the child ended up like that. Hearing that, I felt so indignant for my mother. But as a grandchild, I didn't dare say anything. If I spoke up, my grandmother would tell my father and I would be beaten nearly to death. My father only ever stood up to his mother once when he insisted on marrying my mother. In almost every other matter, he followed his mother's wishes. That year, my grandmother was weak and mostly sat in one place. But she was incredibly difficult and miserable to deal with. Much of the hardship my mother had to endure and the psychological trauma we siblings faced during our childhood came from her. Every time there was a death anniversary or a party, I don't know if my grandmother studied some bitterness from her relatives, but she would come home and make my father very irritable toward my mother. If my mother, out of frustration, spoke back, my father would drag her out and beat her mercilessly, even though for every anniversary that my mother would be there early to help, doing everything with her own hands. Despite that, When it was time to eat, if my grandmother wasn't ordering my mother to get this, my Aunt Sarah would ask her to get that. Basically, with my grandmother in charge, everyone felt they could boss my mother around, and the topic my mother was most frequently criticized for was little Timothy. At home, mother called him Timothy, but the paternal side called him Little Rot. The dropped one because he was born in the field to make it easier to hear. I will continue to call my brother by the name familiar to me, Little Timothy. Truly, people's words are very cruel. Aunt Martha, my grandmother's elder sister, said, "A kid that age who doesn't even know how to stand, yet if it were me, I'd have thrown him in an orphanage and had another one. Why waste rice on him?" Uncle George said, "Give him away to someone else, then have a healthy child to raise, so that when you're old, they can take care of you. Why raise a paralyzed lineage like that for a lifetime?" So many mouths scrutinizing a 5-year-old child. It was painful and filled me with resentment. I was 15 then, but I understood everything. I knew little Timothy suffered many disadvantages, so I loved him very much from the start. Once, I was feeding him in the back kitchen. Upstairs, everyone was noisily gathered eating and drinking for the anniversary. Truthfully, none of us wanted to be there. But my father forced us to come, to burn incense for the ancestors and help with the cooking. But in reality, we were there to be servants for them. I knew the food wouldn't go down easily, but we couldn't leave. We had to wait until my father let us go. We just had to sit there and listen to people whispering this and that about us. We were frustrated but didn't dare argue. And it wasn't that my mother didn't want to treat little Timothy. Every penny she made, she tried to save to take him to the hospital for checkups. She also took him to any herbalist people recommended. Everyone said little Timothy's bones and joints were normal. My mother was frustrated, saying, "If he's normal, why can't he walk or talk?" They told the family to wait a bit longer to see, so we just had to accept it. Then, by chance, while my mother was working with a group of hired laborers for a large estate with high stone walls, the homeowners happened to be very serious about feng shui. When my mother's group entered, the homeowner and a feng shui master were discussing construction in the yard. Suddenly, the master stared intently at my mother. She didn't pay much attention and went to help dig a trench in the backyard. A while later, the lady of the house called my mother in. My mother was bewildered. When she went inside, she met the couple and the master, whom they called Master Sebastian. The three of them asked my mother to sit down. Master Sebastian said, "Looking at you, I see two spirits in your house, one old and one young. These two spirits have followed you for a long time. Is it true you have a child who has difficulty walking?" My mother was stunned. She had always thought little Timothy's condition was from the womb. She never thought it was a spiritual matter. He continued, saying those two spirits had a bit of a grudge with your mother-in-law. Consequently, the child spirit is haunting your child, and the old lady spirit is haunting your mother-in-law. My mother, half believing, asked for more details about the grudge. Master Sebastian said she had to go home and ask her mother-in-law. Only when the story was clear could he help. He gave her his address and told her to come back only when the grandmother was willing to tell the truth. If she chose to hide it, then they would just have to endure it. Do you think my mother dared to ask? She didn't dare. She only waited for a time when my father was in a good mood to ask him tentatively. My father told her that when he was young, there were two neighbors next to my grandmother's house, a grandmother and her grandson. The old lady was around 60, and the boy was about 10 or so. They were very poor, scavenging for scrap to survive. One day, as they were walking past, the boy accidentally bumped into and knocked over a tray of bananas that my grandmother was drying. Seeing this from inside, my grandmother came out and scolded them harshly. The old lady apologized, her hands busy picking them up. The boy also helped. He was young, but very well behaved. To be fair, once bananas fall on the ground, they are dirty and can't be eaten. My grandmother was so angry she went over and shoved the boy. It was a light shove to get him out of the way, not malicious, but he was a child, being pushed. He fell sideways onto the ground. The old lady, pained for her grandson, said, "My grandson accidentally knocked them over, so I am picking them up for you. Why did you have to shove him?" Even when young, my grandmother was known for being abrasive. My grandmother shouted back and chased them away. After walking a few steps, the boy suddenly had a seizure. His eyes rolled back, and he foamed at the mouth. My grandmother was startled, partly out of fear and partly because she thought the lady would demand compensation. She hurried back into her house. By the evening, when she went out to buy things, she heard the boy had died. The shop owner said the boy had epilepsy. My father said my grandmother didn't know for sure if her pushing him caused his death, but she was very afraid. She kept quiet and didn't dare tell my grandfather. Only a few people from the neighborhood attended the boy's funeral. His parents didn't even come. Only the old lady handled the funeral and burial, and the grave was very simple. After the funeral, every time the old lady walked past the house, she would mumble curses. Her point was that my grandmother was cruel for pushing her grandson. At first, my grandmother endured it, but after hearing it many times, she shouted back. Eventually, the two hated each other like cats and dogs. The old lady said my grandmother was rich, but had no virtue. Indeed, my father's family was well off then. My grandmother countered that the old lady was poor because of her mouth. The boy died. What does it have to do with me? Then one day, seeing my grandmother sweeping the yard, the old lady cursed again. My grandmother snapped back, saying the old lady knew how to give birth but not how to raise a daughter, who then had a child out of wedlock. He's dead, so just let it be. The old lady replied that even if she died, she would return to haunt my grandmother's family. It seemed like an empty threat, but 2 days later, the old lady actually died. Hit by a vehicle right in front of the house. That day, she was coming home when a drunk man from the village hit her. He fell too. There was a loud crash, but the impact seemed light. He helped her into her house. She could still talk, but by the next morning, she had passed away. It wasn't until the scrap dealer noticed she hadn't come to sell anything that they found her. By then, her body was stiff and her face pale. After the old lady died, my grandmother's health declined significantly. Most of the family's wealth was spent on her medical bills. By the time my mother had little Timothy, my grandmother was confined to one spot, and most of the land was gone. My father was the eldest son, but because my mother wasn't liked, they were only given a small plot of land to farm and raise their children. After hearing the story, my mother suspected my grandmother was being haunted, but how could she dare tell her? With my grandmother's temperament, telling her would only lead to more scolding. My mother only worried for little Timothy. She went to see Master Sebastian and told him everything. Master Sebastian said, "Your mother-in-law's nature won't change even until death. A leopard cannot change its spots. So, just focus on your child. Now, listen to me. Go home and buy a large, fat, and live snakehead fish. Don't say a word to anyone. Bring it home, hold it by the head, and strike the fish's tail against your son's legs. But you must not let the fish fall on the ground." As she was walking out, he added, "On your way home, if you smell anything strange, like something rotten or burnt, just keep walking straight. Don't stop or look around." My mother wanted to ask why, but he shooed her away, saying, "Go take care of your child. When he can walk, come back, and I will explain." So my mother did exactly as Master Sebastian said. She went to the market early to choose a very fat snakehead fish that was still jumping. After buying it, she asked the seller to keep it in the water for her. At noon, after finishing work, she went back to get it. It was midday, and the sun was at its peak. She carried the bag with the fish and walked home. On the dirt path past my grandmother's house, her house was at the beginning of the path. Then our house, just a few steps past the grandmother's house. She suddenly smelled something rotten. At first, it was faint, like a distant smell carried by the wind, but it got stronger, as if someone were blowing that foul air directly into her face. Within that smell of rotting fish, there was also the smell of something burning. It was exactly as Master Sebastian had described. At that time, my mother didn't know better, so she wasn't afraid yet. Remembering the master's words, she walked straight home. She secretly carried little Timothy to the back of the house, sat him on a wooden platform, and let his legs hang down. She held the head of the fish and struck its tail against his legs. The fish was slippery. She had to hook her fingers into its gills. She did it a couple of times, then looked at little Timothy to see if anything changed. At that moment, I came down from the front house, but she told me to go back up. She did that twice, and then little Timothy could walk. At first, he waddled like a baby just a few months old, but later he could stand and walk like other children. Needless to say, everyone was overjoyed. Only my grandmother curled her lip and said, "He's over 5 years old and just now learning to walk. You act like it's something precious." By then, my mother truly believed Master Sebastian that little Timothy had been haunted by a spirit, which was why he couldn't walk. Now that he could walk, my mother thought about telling my grandmother so she would know how the past was affecting her. But after hearing her cold words, my mother was so annoyed she kept quiet. Besides, even if she told her, the grandmother wouldn't believe it. My mother bought fruit to visit Master Sebastian to thank him. What he said next made her skin crawl. He said it wasn't a coincidence she smelled those foul odors on the road. Usually, when you are on a quiet road and suddenly smell perfume, it's a female spirit. The smell of tobacco is a male spirit. The smell of medicated oil is an elderly spirit. The smell of incense, that's the ancestors following you. The scent of sandalwood is for the celestial beings, but the smells of rot and burning belong to demons that are following you. The more intense the smell, the closer they are to your face. Hearing that, my mother froze in fear. Thanks to Master Sebastian's help that time, little Timothy could walk. As for his speech and mental development, the Master said that was heaven's will. Essentially, Master Sebastian said little Timothy was bearing all the karma of the family. My brother Thomas and I were born first and took all the cleverness. So little Timothy inherited the bad and the slow parts of the family's fate. Have you noticed that in large families, there is often one person who is simpler or slower than the others? They aren't necessarily stupid, but they are very gentle or slow-witted, while everyone else is sharp. People often say that person is the karma bearer for the family. Master Sebastian meant little Timothy was like that. However, the family's karma was heavy, so what he had to bear was quite severe. My mother was very sad. That's why, while she was alive, she always reminded me, whatever you do, take care of your brother. He was born to endure the injustices of life. I always remembered my mother's words. Since my father passed away, we rarely went to the paternal side's house because there was little love to begin with. Our relationship was cold. My grandmother remained the same, sitting in one place, but still very difficult with her grandchildren. Only when she got much older did she soften slightly. She only ever called for my brother Thomas. She said that when she passed, she would leave the ancestral house to Thomas because he was normal and could worship the ancestors. As a daughter who would eventually belong to another family, I had no opinion, but I was sad and hurt for little Timothy. He was also her grandson. If she didn't love him, fine. But why say such bitter things? Later, I got married near home to a man named David, whose family situation was similar to mine. We had enough to eat but weren't wealthy. After 2 years, I had twin boys. They were adorable. My husband David cherished them like precious gems, no matter how hard he worked. He never let the kids go hungry for a day. By then, Thomas was also married and had moved into my grandmother's house. Little Timothy still lived with our mother. Right after I gave birth, my mother brought little Timothy to visit. While my mother and I were playing with the baby, little Timothy sat by the doorway. He looked like he really wanted to cuddle them, but he was afraid and didn't dare come in. Knowing this, I gestured for him to come and hold a baby. He looked so happy. His hands were clumsy, but he held the baby very gently. He had been holding the baby for less than 3 minutes when David came home from the fields and saw it. He immediately snatched the baby away and didn't let little Timothy hold him. His face was very angry, I could tell. After my mother and brother left, David didn't say anything, but he kept walking back and forth with a dark face. During dinner, I couldn't take it and said, "If you don't like him, fine. But why the attitude? He is my brother," David replied. "I'm not letting a crazy person hold my child. Who knows if he'll have a fit and throw my kid down." How would we handle that? He wasn't done. He said my mother smelled strongly of medicated oil, and it wasn't good for a baby to breathe in that old person smell. Hearing him call my brother crazy and complain about my mother's smell, the affection I had for him faded significantly. The feeling that the man I shared a bed with did not respect or empathize with my family was incredibly painful. Back then, I was young and hadn't thought things through. Hearing him insult my mother and brother made me furious. I decided to get back at him in my own way. Whenever he went to work or was away, I would take the twins to my mother's house. I let little Timothy hold my children as much as he wanted. Despite his condition, he was very careful with the babies. Nothing much happened until someone saw us and told David. He made a huge scene and forbade me from going to my mother's house. We argued constantly over it during those years that my mother was still alive, so she and little Timothy had each other, and I didn't worry too much. When my children were 6 years old, my mother passed away. Little Timothy was left all alone in that house. He couldn't move in with Thomas because our grandmother was still there, and she didn't love him at all. To be honest, living with the grandmother had made Thomas listen to her more than to me. I felt that at times, Thomas even resented his own brother. So, the idea of little Timothy living with Thomas was impossible. Every once in a while, Thomas would stop by to burn incense for our parents and give little Timothy some rice and a bit of money for food. It was just to fulfill his duty to our mother's soul. Whether Thomas truly loved him, only he knows. Knowing little Timothy couldn't take care of himself, I told David straight out, "He is my flesh and blood. Our parents are gone. He only has me as a support, so no matter what, I won't abandon him. If you love me, love his life too." David just mumbled and brushed it off. But from then on, when little Timothy came over, he didn't complain as much. As long as he didn't have to look at little Timothy, it was fine. Truly, until now, I still wonder what little Timothy did, what sin he committed against these people that they treated him like that, from my grandmother and father to my brother and husband. Everyone who saw him called him crazy or mad. He was just unlucky to be born like that. If they couldn't love him, they shouldn't have said such bitter things. When we see a stray dog or cat, we feel pity and want to take them in. He was a human being and their own relative. When little Timothy was 31, there was a day with light but persistent rain all day. The weather report said there was a big storm coming with strong winds. People, especially those near open fields, were encouraged to stay indoors. David was at home all day, bored and restless, especially since the wind had knocked down the rice crops. He was in a bad mood. He asked me to grill some dried fish so he could have some drinks. The rest of us were having dinner. While we were eating, little Timothy came over. My back was to the door, so I didn't see him until David spoke in a very unpleasant voice. "Look, your precious brother is here again." Little Timothy was soaking wet and shivering. I hurried to get him a change of clothes. Even from inside, I could hear David grumbling outside, calling him a dark omen and a burden. Little Timothy wasn't even inside yet. He was standing on the porch, taking shelter from the rain. I was furious but said nothing. I went out, pulled my brother inside, and dried him off, looking at the way he stared at the dinner tray. I knew he was starving, but didn't dare say anything, just glancing between his brother-in-law and the two nephews. His awkwardness, not knowing whether to stand or sit, broke my heart. I pulled him a chair and got a full bowl of rice for him. I didn't dare eat, but watched David warily. Little Timothy said with difficulty, "Brother, let me eat." He couldn't speak clearly. I put some fish and vegetables in his bowl and told him to eat. That bowl of rice wasn't eaten in peace. David was already tipsy. He kept complaining about the failed rice crops and the rising prices of meat and fish. Finally, I slammed my bowl down. I said, "I've told you this before. It's just a bowl of rice, yet you've been grumbling the whole time. We truly can't swallow it." I told him that I could never cut the bond of family. If he treated my brother like that, then perhaps he and I couldn't stay together. When I stood my ground, he softened and finally stopped complaining. After dinner, I told little Timothy to go back home to sleep. When he got to the porch, I pressed 2 bananas and some of my children's crackers into his hands, telling him to save them for later if he got hungry. I knew there was no food at his house. Little did I know that was the last meal I would ever cook for my brother. That night, the rain and storm were the longest I've ever experienced. It rained all night without stopping, and the wind hissed through the door gaps. The old stone walls of David's house vibrated as if they were about to collapse. I lay in bed, but my heart was not at peace. I felt very restless. It wasn't until near morning that things calmed down a bit. The wind died down, but the rain persisted. David was drunk and snoring in the front room when someone pounded loudly on the door. They shouted that little Timothy was dead. I threw off the covers and ran out. They said when the wind died down, they went out to check the fields and saw little Timothy lying in the middle of the path. They called him, but he didn't wake up. When they lifted him, they saw blood everywhere. A piece of corrugated metal roofing had flown off and slit his throat. Right there were the 2 bananas I had given him the night before. He died just a short distance from my house, near an orange grove. Yet that night, I had no idea my brother was dying. I was a housewife, only earning a little here and there. Most of the finances were controlled by David, and he was stingy. He didn't want to buy a proper coffin for little Timothy. He said, while he was alive, he did nothing but live off his parents. Now that they're gone, he's a burden to his siblings. A simple burial is enough. In the old days, they just wrapped people in mats. Why demand a good coffin now? Thomas listened to our grandmother, who said the dead don't know anything anyway, so why bother with a good or bad coffin? I almost knelt down to beg, but the paternal side refused to let little Timothy be buried on family land. I wanted to bury him near our parents. I pleaded with David, but he wouldn't give me the money for the coffin. Desperate, I said, "If you don't care that he's my brother, then consider this a loan. I will take him to be cremated and place him in a temple. I will pay you back later." Only then did he give me the money. I took little Timothy to be cremated, intending to leave him at the temple. But that afternoon, while waiting for the ashes, I was so tired I leaned against the wall and fell asleep. In my dream, I saw little Timothy standing right in front of me at the crematorium. He looked very angry and said he didn't want to go to the temple. He said it 3 times. I woke up startled and decided not to leave him at the temple, but to bring him home. I placed his urn on the altar in our parents' old house where he had lived alone. I never expected that someone so simple and gentle in life, who never fought back when hit or scolded, would return to haunt everyone after death. The people he targeted most were my grandmother and David. Once, David was coming home from the fields around 6 p.m. It was dusk, and in the orchard area with few lights, it got dark quickly. As he passed the orange grove where little Timothy had died, he heard a dry, cackling laugh. The laugh clearly sounded like someone who wasn't normal. David knew who it was, having always looked down on little Timothy. He wasn't afraid. He said, "I'm not scared. Don't try to haunt me, or I'll take a blade to you." As soon as he finished, the laughing stopped. Thinking it was over, he hurried home. But after just 3 steps, he tripped over something soft and fell flat on his face. He grumbled, but when he looked back, there was nothing there, only that cackling laugh again. There was no one around. He finally got scared and scrambled home to tell me. I said, "Well, you treated him so badly when he was alive, so now he's coming back to tease you." As for my grandmother, I heard the story from my sister-in-law, Thomas's wife, Emily. One evening after my grandmother had been cleaned and fed her milk, she was put to bed in that old house. From the main door, you see the main altar with 2 side entrances covered by curtains. The grandmother's bed was behind the wall of the spirit altar. There were no doors, only bamboo curtains. When someone moved past them, the bamboo pieces would clatter. Grandmother slept there, while Thomas's family slept in the back. Grandmother was old and mostly stayed in one spot, but her voice was still very strong. She shouted, "Who's fumbling around in the rice bin? Let me sleep." Thomas was out checking traps in the field, and the 2 kids were studying next to their mother, Emily. There was no one else up there. Emily went up to check and saw the grandmother scolding the corner behind the rice bin. "What is it, Grandma?" she asked. The grandmother scolded her, saying she hadn't swept and that rats were making noise. Emily was used to being scolded, so she just went along with it and said she'd clean it tomorrow. She went back down, tired from a long day. 10 minutes later, Thomas came home, and they heard the grandmother shouting again, this time much louder. They both ran up, and she pointed at them, saying, "Which one of you is walking up and down, making those curtains clatter? I'm old and will die soon. Why do you have to torment me?" Emily was exhausted and said no one had been up there. Thomas knew his grandmother's temperament, so they went back down. Throughout the night, Thomas kept an eye on his kids. He heard the grandmother scolding the one standing in the rice bin. Thomas looked but saw nothing. Yet she continued to curse and tell someone to go away. "Don't come back to haunt me." Eventually, Thomas went in. She pointed at the corner and said little Timothy had come back to haunt her. That useless boy. lived for nothing and now haunts people in death. Thomas kept quiet, burned some incense, and brought his bedding to sleep on the floor near her to keep watch. Being tired, he fell asleep quickly, but in the middle of the night, he woke up shivering with cold. As he reached for a blanket, he saw a shadow walk from the front house, pass through the bamboo curtain, and climb into the rice bin. It stood there spinning and dancing. Thomas knew the shadow was his brother. What was terrifying was that the house was tightly closed, yet the bamboo curtain started swaying and clattering rhythmically. Thomas lay there, frozen in fear. Finally, he whispered a prayer. "I know it's you, Timothy. Please stop. Tomorrow, I'll buy steamed buns to offer you." After he prayed, the curtain slowly stopped swaying. When he looked again, the shadow was gone. So, from my grandmother and David to Thomas and Emily, everyone saw little Timothy except for me. Sometimes I wondered why he showed himself to everyone but me. Until one time in the 4th lunar month, I was planning to go on a pilgrimage. I had prepared everything, including a batch of herbal tea to bring along. I asked my son to set an alarm for me and went to sleep. I woke up around 1 a.m. to use the bathroom. I decided to stay awake. As I stepped out, I saw little Timothy sitting at the dining table. He was huddled just as he used to when he came over for dinner and was scolded by David. He looked at me and said very clearly, "Sister, don't go." He didn't stutter or slur his words like he did when he was alive. Although I loved him, at that moment I was terrified. My head started spinning and my temples throbbed. When the alarm went off, my son came to look for me and found me asleep on the floor next to the dining table. I didn't feel well, and remembering my brother's words, I decided not to go. That afternoon, I heard that on the trip, someone's jewelry was snatched, and the bus was involved in an accident on the way back. All 5 people I was supposed to go with were injured. That was the first and last time I ever saw little Timothy. Later, every year, on his death anniversary, I pray for him to visit me or tell me if he has met our parents in the afterlife. But I never saw him again. It's been a long time now. I hope that in another world, he is living a different life, one that is healthier and more brilliant. The students helped me with that phrase. Little Timothy might have been seen as an imperfect child by others, but to me, he was one of the most brilliant fireworks in the world. I stayed with David until my 2 sons entered university. I also paid him back every cent he lent me for the funeral. Then I divorced him. I moved to the city with my children to be close to them and cook for them, giving myself a freer life. This is the end of Ms. Elena's letter about her unlucky younger brother.